I'm Mathew Kerbis, the subscription attorney, and this is Law Subscribed, your dedicated source for all things subscriptions and the law. Thank you to my sponsors. See links to them in the show notes. Everything discussed is only for educational and entertainment purposes. Enjoy the show. Welcome back into what is one of the final episodes of this joint series between A Different Practice and Law Subscribed. It's been a phenomenal run. And, if we can come up with more topics, and if we hear from the listeners, we'll keep doing these things. But, we have come up with a bunch of topics, and it's been fun to cover them. And in particular, we've saved this one for one of the last ones because it's one that Lauren and I also still need to work on, but we know we need to work on it. And because we don't want you to just have imposter syndrome out there and think oh, I know I need to write down my standard operating procedures, but you don't because you're a true solo. And who's following them anyway, right? You have them. They're in your head. Well, that's what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to be talking about our standard operating procedures for how to run a law firm in 2025. So that way the AI can transcribe it and Lauren and I can actually have written standard operating procedures. Lauren, did I summarize that right for everybody?
That sounds perfect.
All right. Well, as we like to do here, the co-host that introduces the topic just kicks it over to the other co-host so that I don't have to be the one who talks about how I have very few actually written out standard operating procedures first. Lauren, I'll let you talk about that and also share the things that would qualify for standard operating procedures, regardless of whether there is an actual written checklist yet or not.
Man, maybe I should have fought more to do the intro so I didn't have to talk first. So I feel slightly embarrassed to be here, but I think that this shows that nobody is perfect and none of us have this all figured out absolutely. It'll be 10 years this year and I have never written down how I do anything because it's just me and I know how I do everything and it changes, quite frankly, pretty frequently. So part of me also thinks not only is it going to be so much work to get it down in the first place, but then I'm just going to be constantly tweaking it because I'm constantly tweaking everything. So it is a task that feels very daunting, but I know that it is important, especially if eventually one day I would want to hand this over to someone else. I don't know if it's in my future to have staff or associates, but if that is in your future, this is definitely something you'll want to invest in now because it makes that transition process much easier. And it also makes it much easier to identify what those folks are going to do. I think a lot of solos often feel overwhelmed. They know that they need help, but if you ask them, well, if you hired someone tomorrow, what are they going to do? They're like, well, I don't know. I just need help, right? It's just the overload, the workload is too much. So really sitting down and thinking about all of the things that you do and standardizing those procedures, it makes it a lot easier to go, oh, of these 20 things, I could give 10 of these to a VA or a assistant or have an associate be able to also do, which may generate more revenue. So I know the goodness of them. I know that they are important. I know in the long term, they are good, but I embarrassingly have zero written down. I have a lot of templates. I have the system in my head. I know exactly how I do everything. It really is just taking the time to put it down. And Matthew, I'm curious if you have come across, because I've been stockpiling a couple of softwares in addition to just talking about what we do and being able to have AI transcribe that for us. I think there are new softwares coming out because every business runs into this issue that makes it easier to write the operating procedure down, actually put the steps in place. And particularly if you use a lot of tech like we do, I always think oh my God, then I have to do all screenshots. And then what if I have client information, right? So then the task just becomes overwhelming. But I think that there are some softwares out there. I think I saw, was it Scribe recently? Hopefully I'm not getting that wrong. It sort of records your screen and it records the steps and then puts screenshots and writes the steps down for you. So there really is no excuse other than I just don't want to do it right now to actually put this in place. But I think it's made it so much easier than maybe it would have even been 5 years ago. So that's my therapy and my confession for the day. Bad solo over here.
I mean, we're in this long enough now. If we haven't already disclosed it, Lauren and I record several of these episodes in a row, and we do batching for recording and editing. And so that's not your first therapy session today, Lauren. We're gonna have tease for a couple episodes from now, you're going to also have another therapy session. That's a different kind of therapy. So yeah, look, I have some things written down, but not in the like by definition standard operating procedure, like what you're supposed to do, right? And part of that is, I can get away just like you with not having to write everything down, because what if I want to change something, or what if I want to do something different? It's just me after all, right? And I can tell all the listeners that I am now just using, whether it's like in like an actual chat with a potential client, a follow-up one-on-one, an existing client, they'll probably be using Paxton instead of that. Even right now for this interview or for this co-hosting joint series live, I'm using Perplexity AI. And so guess what, Lauren? Yes, Scribe. That was actually the #1 suggested tool according to Perplexity. So first I
Nice.
asked, first I asked Perplexity Pro, like, what is a standard operating procedure, right? And now, of course, what it did is it rephrased my what question into explaining what a standard operating procedure is, because it takes your bad prompts and it makes them better. And so, yeah, I mean, the Perplexity definition, which is synthesized from all of human knowledge on the internet, at least in the English language, is a detailed written instruction that outlines the steps necessary to complete specific tasks or processes. I mean, I think that's a pretty good definition. Lauren, do you agree with that?
Yeah, spot on.
Yeah. So I have mental standard operating procedures mostly. And
Correct.
just to have a list isn't necessarily an SOP, right? So like, it was maybe even our previous episode, we talked about outsourcing. And like, I have that list of like 28, 30 things that I would have an outsourced like legal extern do. And they're not even going to be able to do all of it probably in like the 3 months that they'll be working with me. But that's not even a standard operating procedure, right? Those are just tasks. Those are just things to accomplish, right? And I think with a Perplexity, with your preferred AI tool, like what you could do is you could even just take a task that you do, like client intake, for example, and you could say, all right, here's what I do for client intake. Help me create a standard operating procedure for this for a solo practice law firm where it's just me who's going to be doing the SOP. And I think that AI could really leverage that. I mean, look, like we're joking, but I'm serious. I'm taking this transcript, Lauren, and I'm going to make sure that like we turn this podcast episode for us into SOPs for us, right? So like and I'm going to give a real world example that actually just happened for the second time only in 3 years, where I had to refund a client. It happens. Look, it's going to happen, right? One of the reasons I only charge $20 a month and $50 a page is that people understand that I think they're still getting a great value. So even if it's not perfect or exactly what they want or had in mind, which we've also talked about, there's this cognitive disconnect between, lawyer expensive, high quality legal services, and I'm trying to provide affordable legal services that are still quality, but it's not your white glove experience when you're paying 10 times, to some other lawyer what they're paying me, and you're paying it in arrears and you don't know how much it's going to cost until the services are already done. So, but every now and again, like I knew this was going to happen, that I'd have to, do a refund in a couple circumstances. The other refund, the previous one, was I took on a client. I told them in the beginning, I really don't think I can help you with this. It's really outside my expertise. I tried to do a fixed fee price based on the thing applying AI. And this was like over a year ago now. And the AI is much better now. I could probably do it now with legal AI. But anyway, at the time, it was a different jurisdiction, though my client was in Illinois. It was about a subject matter that I'm not super familiar with in like the really deep startup founder space. And I recommended some other lawyers, but he really wanted to use me. And I was like, okay, whatever, fine. And then I didn't do a good job. It took a long time, and I wasn't really able to get what I felt was a quality answer. And so he asked for a refund. And so those are the two instances. Just a client who like didn't like the service because they were expecting something different, and then somebody who I tried to say no to ended up saying yes anyway. And my initial instincts were right. I ended up doing work and giving a refund anyway. And this wasn't like we're talking about like the most recent one was less than $100, and the previous one was like $500. So this isn't going to break the bank for my law firm to do these refunds. One of the benefits of not charging a lot of money for still, faster but high quality, than before you could give within the AI world legal services. So I did do those refunds. So my standard operating procedure for something like that is, if you feel you need to give a refund or the client asks for a refund, it doesn't matter about the facts. You refund them, you apologize that the service was not satisfactory, and you wish them well. Because it's just not worth the fallout of bad reviews, bad word of mouth, whatever, even if you did spend a lot of time and you have to refund a lot of money, sure, you might be able to do partial refund or whatever, but put yourself in the shoes of the consumer. I've asked for full refunds a handful of times throughout my life in getting services or products or whatever. And I'd rather I will forget about it as long as I get my money back. And so that's just been the approach that I've taken. Give the full refund, apologize they weren't satisfied, and wish them well. 3-step standard operating procedure for having to refund a client. So that's one that I just had to do for the second time in 3 years.
Check, done.
Yep. And now that is and now that I've done it more than once, I have a standard operating procedure for it. And that could also be a good thing. If you have to do something more than once, make it a standard operating procedure.
So I have a question for you, Matthew. As you were saying that, I'm curious, and just for your thoughts here, but a lot of what we do is automated. So I'm trying to think like, okay, when I have a new client come on board, there are 4 or 5 steps that I have to do. They get converted automatically in my CRM, but I need to like set their folders up in Dropbox. I make sure that I have my Google filter on so that all of their emails go into their folder, right? A couple of things that I can't quite automate yet. But most of it is automated. Like it just happens automatically. And so what is your take on, is that included in an SOP? This is what the automation is doing, A, B, C, and D, and then this is what manually we have to do? Or do we not include, is an SOP in your eyes only for sort of manual work? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. And I think it's probably something that the listeners are going to be asking too. I think a good reason to come up with standard operating procedures for your law firm is so that you can automate as much of them as possible. And so I don't think just because now they've been automated, they're not an SOP. No, on the contrary, especially in today's world, if you could just come in with an automation, that's automating a standard operating procedure, right? It's like everything Gavel helps you do is kind of just like automating a standard operating procedure in a way for a law firm, whether that's the delivery, like productizing your legal service requires understanding what you do for that service, which requires creating an SOP for that particular service, right? So sure, like to an extent, if somebody comes in to even though I don't advertise this, I just think it's a great example of one of the things, since I don't advertise it because I make okay money, but not a lot of money on my simple estate plans, which I've talked about before. Somebody asked me, oh, could you help me with estate? Yes, I can. And what do? I share the link with them that is the Google form where I'm capturing information that's a lead gen tool. So it's not necessarily connected to the automation, though I can connect it to the automation. It's a lead gen opportunity that collects all the information I need for the automation, right? So even if I ultimately have to, connect that, and in the beginning I was just copying and pasting, their responses into the automation for the simple estate plan, like that's an SOP in a way, right? Share the link with them, collect the information, set it into the automation. It creates the documents, double check the documents that the automations happen correctly, send it to the client for review, make minor changes with the client. Actually, the moment they decide to hire me and pay for the thing, invoice them first, right? So then they become a subscriber, invoice them for the simple estate plan first, then do all the work. This is why it's important for us to talk about these, because this isn't actually written down for me, Lauren, right? And then same thing with prenups, same thing with real estate transactions, except the debt payment comes at the closing, just due to the nature of how they happen here in Illinois. So a lot of that stuff is all automated. And even now, if I'm getting like a new contract from a client to review, and I haven't seen this contract before, it's upload it to Paxton in that client file, open the analysis module in Paxton and provide it with a prompt that explains which party I represent, what I'm looking to do, and, to do its first round review and identify, the most problematic clauses for the client that I represent. Right. And so and then from there, it is a little bit kind of loosey goosey, right? It's like, okay, well, it depends on what the things say. But even after that, I know it's my standard thing to say, okay, for these 5 clauses or however many I've identified are actually relevant, let's rewrite them so that they favor my client. And that's what I prompt the technology to do. It does that. I put it in a red line in a Word document, because let's be real, if there's another attorney, they're using Word. I prefer Google Docs. And so it's a little bit manual there. And I don't know if I want like if you're using Spellbook, that's a plugin inside of Word, and you could probably ask Spellbook to do the same thing the way I'm using Paxton, and it will just redline it for you right in there. and I'm sure Spellbook is great, but it's a GPT wrapper, and Paxton is a GPT wrapper with a proprietary legal large language model. I just find that the output I get from Paxton is better, even if there's some manual copying and pasting back and forth. Well, what this ultimately results in sometimes is just block replacements of contracts rather than a fine-tuned red line. But for the types of deals I'm working on, that's fine. We're replacing this section with a different section. And sure, there might be like, could I have just replaced a few words? Yeah, but I'm just going to copy and paste the whole thing and you'll see that it's a different paragraph, right? So like that's how that's my SOP for analyzing and revising contracts. Pretty straightforward of a process. And I don't have it written down because it's straightforward. But now, thanks to this transcript of this episode, I will have it written down.
Let me tell you about the brand new sponsor for Law Subscribed, Paxton. I've been using Paxton as my legal AI tool for over 2 years. I continue to evaluate and demo other legal AI tools in the market and still decide to stick with Paxton because of its reliability, its accuracy, its ease of use, affordability, and they do not lock you into a long-term contract. Now, as a transactional and fractional general counsel attorney, I'm using Paxton for all of my substantive and non-substantive legal work, whether that's legal research, analysis, drafting, or enhancing existing legal work product. In the time it used to take me to draft and analyze legal documents, now, after a little bit of back and forth with Paxton, I have something ready to go in minutes that used to take hours or even days. While I'm no longer a litigator, I could see how valuable Paxton would be when researching a new issue, preparing for a deposition, drafting a motion, or going to trial. So if your firm would benefit from using Paxton as your legal AI tool, then make sure to use the link in the description when signing up to let Paxton know I sent you. That's all about our new sponsor. Now back to the show.
I think that's such a good point. And I was thinking too, as much as we automate and writing everything down is going to help us identify probably what we could automate more potentially. But I still think there's a lot of value in putting down the entire process step by step and maybe even noting what the automation or the AI is doing or how we are using it currently, because we talked before about reviewing our expenses and consolidating or see if there's something new and improved out there that could do 2 things versus 1 thing, that does whatever. 2 softwares that can do the same thing. Y'all know what I'm talking about. So I think even saying, this is what I'm having Paxton do, or for me, right? The client is going in for estate planning and putting in their information. I use Gavel. Gavel is then plugging that into the templates I have created where the information is appropriate. And so if down the road there's a new, better feature to Gavel or a new, better software, I can go, okay, I need the new software to do X, Y, and Z because that's what Gavel is doing. And I don't want to take 2 steps backwards. So even when it's not us really doing those steps or putting in that work, having a description of what the AI or automation is doing can still be super helpful to have that down for future changes.
Yeah, and going back to like earlier episodes, right, Lauren? Like you check twice a month in Wave accounting to categorize. I used to do it 4 times, and after hearing that you only do it twice, I'm like, yeah, why am I doing it every week? This is ridiculous. Now I have a calendar reminder in my calendar twice a month, to go in and categorize, and like that's an SOP. It's just a calendar. It's a recurring calendar reminder, and that could be a way to write down your SOPs and actually fulfill them for the business ops part of running a law firm in 2025. Put a recurring event in your calendar and boom, that's an SOP. And maybe even in the description, have the links and everything right there in the calendar reminder so you don't have to go anywhere to do it.
Yeah, super helpful. And if you're like me and have any sort of task manager and have built in templates into your task manager, I think a lot of the elements of a standard operating procedure we probably have if we have built a somewhat efficient firm where we're not trying to reinvent the wheel every single time. So for me, for every new case that gets signed up, I go into my task manager. And if it's an estate plan, I go to my estate planning template. It has the 25 things I need to do from send them the questionnaire, draft it. Have they gotten back to me with change? I mean, every little thing. That's a great place for me to start. And so if listeners have that in their firms already, right, I have most of the steps down. It's really just going in and fleshing out, okay, when it pops up on my to-do list to draft the initial documents, what then am I doing? Where is Gavin plugged into that? And just fleshing it out. But we may have a lot of the elements already because hopefully we're all being super efficient. That's how we're going to make profits even higher. So really just using those instead of thinking about like, God, I have to start this from scratch. I'm staring at a blank piece of paper. Where do I even begin? I do a million things every day. Take little bite size and use what you've got and just build off of it.
Yeah, yeah. And so I want to bring us back to like the tech tools that could help us, since that tends to be we're always talking technology here. You mentioned Scribe, and that's interesting. Now, what I also did when I asked that question to Perplexity, I asked what software solutions help to create and maintain standard operating procedures, and Scribe was one of the ones that it suggested. So Scribe, Document 360, Process Street, Trainual, like manual, but it's train, Tallyfi, Dozuki, Way We Do, Sweet Process, and Cluzo. So anyway, there you go. No warranty or representation that any of these tools are actually any good. But next what I did is I asked for law firms in particular, solo law firms, what technology which of these tools or other ones you didn't mention would be useful for them. And it named Sweet Process again. And it says it's user-friendly, robust functionality, easy, and affordable, which makes it ideal for solo law firm attorneys, right? To stick with the theme there. Process Street was another one. Trello and Asana, which I've heard of both of those. And I've tried to use Trello and I've tried to use Asana. And at least for me, it didn't work. Trello, if you're familiar with Kanban boards and like using sticky notes and like moving them from one category to the next, it's sort of like a technology version of Kanban boards and sticky notes and moving them into different categories. So I could see how that, like sort of just by the nature of like using Kanban boards, you kind of have to have your SOPs, your things of what you want to do. And interestingly, at the time of recording, I've heard that Trello is doing a major pivot into solopreneurs. And so I just re-downloaded the app, even though I haven't used it since I think even before I started my law firm over 3 years ago. And I am going to start experimenting with it again and see, because if they're also going and looking at that market, they should have an affordable price for the premium features. So yeah. And I know lawyers that use Asana, and I've had them on Law Subscribed. So if you're already using that, yeah, look, like you said, Lauren, look at the tech tools you're already using. Are you using ClickUp? Are you using Clio? Because also Clio and Practice Panther came up on this report too as legal practice management software tools that allow you to create SOPs. I don't know. I haven't used them. You're a former Clio user, Lauren. Did you see anything like that back when you were a user?
No. So I'm you said that. I'm curious now how that would work. Maybe that's something they added recently.
Mm-hmm.
I think of them, and maybe this is a fallacy on my part, ultimately as a document with steps, like client onboarding, step 1, right? Send invoice, step 2, whatever your steps are. So I'm curious how even something like Trello would work, but I think this is something, again, every business has to deal with. So it's interesting to see that there's all of these different permutations, and you just got to find what works for you.
Yep. And look, if you ever record a podcast episode, dear listeners, and you don't actually do the thing that you're talking about, just use Perplexity AI to come up with a bunch of stuff for you to talk about. Quick tip there.
We're all always learning constantly. How do I do this? Well, how can I do this better?
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, I'm trying to think if there's any other, those are sort of my key. It's onboarding clients, which is mostly automated for me through SweetDash and Stripe integrated. And coming up with how I and even I iterate on those, right? Like I used to ask, and there was some friction there. I intended friction, but not the right kind of friction. Where one of the questions was, are you living or transacting in Illinois, like on the form? And I added an option for no, and I put in parentheses, if you just clicked no, don't finish this form. But I'd have people finish the form, and so I realized, oh my God, I'm just going to take that off. And you either, and then the only options are, yes, I live in Illinois, I have a deal in Illinois, and I changed transactions to deals because less is more. People think I got to get this deal done. Transactions very jargony, and I put in parentheses, if both apply, pick either one, in the prompt, right? Because I want it to be a required question that they answer, because I can't help you if you're not in Illinois or your transaction is not in Illinois. So it's a crucial thing. And also it was kind of confusing. That I let them pick no and complete the form, but I said it and forgot it. And then but somebody asked me about it and I was like, oh yeah, I haven't even thought about that in a long time. I'm going to go update that. I was able to update it across all my, intake, Sweet Dash does, for all the things I don't love about it, it's still a 7 out of 10 for me. Like, it made it really easy for me to go and fix it and update it across all the automations for the intake that I have. So I had to change that recently. So yeah, intake, when I get like a file from a client, what do I like, or an assignment or a project from a client, what I do with it. And that, like, those are the big ones, right? And then the other things are just putting everything on your calendar, like, to the extent that you can. Like, that's what I do, right? So like, a lot of my, I guess, standard operating procedures are go into Calendly and leverage all of the buffering and types of automations for scheduling stuff, right? And the follow-ups and automated reminders and all that stuff. So that's just another example of, inside of these software tools we use, set up the automations that allow you to do the things in the order that you want them to be done if you could automate it. And I think AI agents soon are going to revolutionize this automating your SOP space. So now is the time to write down or use AI to help create your standard operating procedures, because AI agents are coming and they could just run with them if you have that stuff written out.
Yeah, that's really smart. I think thinking through the main areas of your practice. So, even going back to marketing, if you're doing your own marketing, right? What does that look like? What is the consistency of it? What are your objectives? Having all of that down on paper. Thinking about your sales process, like you said, Matthew, right? Sort of that sales and onboarding. When somebody calls, what does the consultation look like? How do they pay you, et cetera? The delivery of services is going to be a big chunk of an SOP. And it's going to have different main sections depending on your practice area. So, Matthew, for you, it's business and maybe estate planning and prenups, right? So I have probate cases and some uncontested family cases and estate planning and prenups and tax. So if you have a wider range of practice areas, you're going to probably have a bigger section of the delivery of service, but really going through and thinking, what do I do when a new estate planning client comes in? And if they're just a will-based estate plan versus a trust-based, like, is that different? I think this is a place too. I don't know if we've talked about it, but now is as good a time as any. That process mapping really helps. So if you're like, I don't know what I do, like, it's just whatever's in front of me, I deal with it. I think I kind of do the same thing every time naturally, but I'm not entirely sure. It really helps to sit down and process map and just kind of decision tree out what happens from somebody calls my law firm or somebody books a consultation. Okay, what's the next step? How do things kind of go right? Like, what do you expect to happen? You have the consultation, right? But there are times where other things are a possibility. What happens if they cancel the consultation? Do you want a follow-up email? Do you want to give them something that says, hey, no problem, you can reschedule, or here's more information about our firm in case you need help in the future? So kind of sitting down and process mapping, I think, could be the first step if you're more of a visual person, of thinking about how everything goes and then being able to put words and actual step-by-step to each of those parts. But, you mentioned, Matthew, just the business itself too. How are you dealing with finances? How frequently are you doing that? What are you doing every time you sit down and do that? Make sure that you have all that in place. And just kind of looking at the year end or maybe biannual things that you do as like a review, right? What does goal setting look like? What does tech evaluations look like? All of that, right? Getting that down on paper. If you've already got it in your calendar, that's awesome. But putting it down in terms of what are you looking to do? What are the objectives? So it's just the delivery of services, but the whole running of the machine, right? The whole operation.
Yeah. And I'm so glad we're doing this, Lauren, because it's forcing me to think about stuff. So I'll leave folks with my final SOP that they could take and use too, or they're adapted to their practice. And that is, and this is like sort of like if I have like an umbrella SOP that like just helps me run my firm. And that is whenever I get an email or a message or however I'm getting it from the client, an assignment of a project or a thing to do, it goes on what I have as a time block list, where it's all the things I need to time block to do. And I have recurring things on that list that I might not want to set a recurring calendar reminder for because I want some flexibility on my calendar. And I've been looking for an AI tool to solve this problem. I thought I found one in Before Sunset AI, but Before Sunset doesn't actually use AI to time block. It helps you create the to-do list, which is like not what I wanted it to do. And I emailed them and said, hey, I thought like, anyway, the point is I'm probably going to be asking for partial refund from Before Sunset. But this is a manual process. It doesn't take a lot of time because like as things come in, I almost always have that tab open. It's just a Google Doc. I'm sure I could be more, techie about it, but I'm already pretty techie in a lot of other ways. So just a time block list in a Google Doc that I add to throughout the day if there might be some assignments. And then at the end of every day, I have a calendar reminder that's like, okay, and it's at 8:30. So it's after, the kid is down to sleep, had dinner, all that stuff. Sit down for 10 or 15 minutes, look at the list, and figure out for the next day where I could time block some things. And I try to, and I also with Calendly, I don't let anybody book within, 24 hours, really it's 12 hours of that time, like starting at 8 p.m. So that way I know everything that I could plan it around scheduled calls for the following day. And that's it. And so that's like an SOP is as throughout my day, as I get potential assignments, add it to the list. At the end of my day, prioritize what's important and assign myself things in certain time slots the next day. And so that's an SOP I definitely need to write out because I'm doing it almost every day anyway.
That is such an interesting, unique take on time blocking that I have not heard. And that makes so much sense. I've really struggled with time blocking because our lives don't work that way and running a business doesn't work that way. But that is a really great way to be able to do it and still have that kind of deep work time, but then choosing, here's my list of things that I need for that deep work time. What am I going to do, tomorrow? What's at the top of the list? So I like it, Matthew. That's brilliant.
I appreciate it. Honey, hey, can you come here? Lauren just said I'm brilliant. Oh, I could just share this episode when it's live. Speaking of our
He
honeys,
already knows that.
right? I don't know. It's always great to hear it from an unbiased third party. Speaking of our honeys, though, Lauren, how about you tell folks about next episode?
Yeah, so we're going to take a little bit of a zoom out because we don't run our businesses in a vacuum in our lives. I like to think of my business as a life-first business, right? It's there to support the type of life that I want. So in the next episode, we're going to talk about how we came to that for each of ourselves, like personally, what's important to us, how our business helps us support the values in our lives that are important, how it helps us with parenthood, how it has made parenthood more challenging, how parenthood has made business more challenging, just all of that so that you all know that this is a very fluid approach, right? You're not going to just shut off your business brain and turn on your life brain. It all happens all at once. So we'll give some insights into how we think about that, how we approach it, what some of the wins have been, what some of the challenges have been. So stay tuned next time as we have another therapy session, and we'll see you all then.
And that's a wrap. Thanks for tuning in. Make someone's day by sharing this episode with them. The best way to get in touch is to follow and message me on LinkedIn. To get extra content, subscribe to the newsletter at www.lawsubscribe.com, where you can also become a paid subscriber to get episodes and content early. Until next time, this is Mathew Kerbis with Law Subscribed.